I experienced one of God's promptings a few years ago in my life, and I want to rewind the clock with you back to Sunday, February 2, 2014. Sunday, February 2, 2014. Does anyone know what happened on that day? Groundhog Day. What else? The Super Bowl. Super Bowl 48. So it was my senior year at Andrews University, and I found myself sitting by myself in a hotel room in Chicago. The Seahawks were facing the Broncos in Super Bowl 48. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, why in the world was I sitting by myself in a hotel room watching the biggest sporting event of the year? The reason was because I was such a big fan of Peyton Manning that I didn't want any distractions that day, and I didn't want to cook. So I got a hotel and thought of ordering a bunch of food from room service. Okay, I'm just kidding. That was not the real reason. I'm a big fan of Peyton Manning, but not that much of a fanatic. The real reason was that I had an interview for an auditing position here in Vancouver, Washington, a place I've never been to before. So I was supposed to get on an early morning flight the next day from Chicago Midway Airport to Portland. Because the flight was early in the morning, my prospective employer allowed me to take the drive a day early, so I didn't have to battle Chicago wintry conditions. Anyone here driven through Chicago in the winter? The worst. Don't want to do that. So I watched the game, bitterly, mind you, as I watched Peyton Manning receive quite the licking that evening. I ironed my clothes, and I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up early, put on my best interview attire, and rode the hotel shuttle to the airport. I got in the very long line at the TSA at the checkpoint there. And everything felt so surreal, because there was all these business travelers in their nice suits and bags and all that stuff, along with heavily geared football fans that went to the Super Bowl, still wearing their lanyards across their neck. So after security was passed, I did the business traveler thing, and I got into another line where I bought myself an $8 breakfast sandwich and a $4 chai latte from Starbucks. Finally, I got on a Southwest Airlines 737 jet and found an open window seat on the right-hand side of the airplane. As the 4-hour flight began, I started talking to the couple sitting next to me on my left. They were from Portland, and they told me how I should go on a hike to Multnomah Falls, and then right after that, go to Powell Bookstore downtown and have a good coffee while reading the books. In my head, I'm thinking, do I look like I came prepared for a hike? Also, I just got excused from 2 days' worth of classes. Why would I go to a bookstore? Forgive me of my ignorance. I have since seen the light. The plane started its descent into thick, dark cloud coverage. It seemed so long. I could feel my heart rate beating faster and faster as I felt the pressure in my ears start to change and the clouds around me getting darker and darker. Finally, we broke through the clouds around 5,000 feet above the ground. I saw the lush green evergreens and the calming blue of the Columbia River. As we neared the north side runway, I peered out and saw a long, curved bridge beneath me. It was in that moment that I heard it. I heard the prompting voice, gently and clearly cutting through the droning turbine noise around me. Ashok, this is your new home. It will be because of something more than a job. You just don't know it yet. But for now, welcome home. I heard the voice. And in that moment, I believed it was God's Spirit providing me a peaceful assurance that God was already leading the way. And before I even started that interview, I knew in my heart this is where I needed to be. And 6 months later, God brought it to fruition. This was God's prompting in my life. And it's a moment I've looked back on many, many times, and I hold it very close to my heart. And when I look at the story of the Magi, I believe that God's Spirit prompted them to go find the baby Jesus. In their hearts, the Magi believed he was the true Messiah, the King of Kings, Emmanuel, God with us. So let's go to Matthew chapter 2. We'll be here for our whole time together this morning, starting with verse 1 through 2. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 2. It says this: After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." The Magi were prompted to go worship Jesus. They were prompted to go. So let's notice a few things here. Upon introduction of the Magi, Matthew is the only gospel that mentions them. In this passage, the Bible does not explicitly say how many wise men were there. Culturally, we expect there to be 3 of them, right? Because of the 3 gifts that were later given in the passage. The Bible does not say what eastern country or kingdom they were from. Today, we expect them to be from Persia, Assyria, or Babylon. The Bible doesn't even mention their names. But when I look at what is said, it's apparent to me that they are known by 2 things: their livelihood and their bloodline. What do I mean by that? Firstly, the Magi were known to be scholars and scientists. They were looking for truths that would define their lives. So they set out to prophecies found in Scripture, such as the prophecy of Balaam, and they believed in them wholly. Secondly, the root form of the word magi in Greek is magos. Magos means of foreign origin. So to me, though they may seem as men of privilege, they were really unprivileged because they were foreigners with no holy bloodline. They had no business being associated with the King of the Jews. And yet, God's guiding hand, found in his starry creations and in truth-filled Scripture, prompted them to go on a holy journey with him. If I could use Pastor George's tagline from a couple weeks ago, the Magi said yes to the prompting God had given them. I believe God's Spirit was in them. The same Spirit that was there in Genesis chapter 1 that hovered over the waters. The same Spirit that filled the aged Elizabeth to have John the Baptist. The same Spirit that allowed Jesus to be conceived in the womb of the Virgin Mary. Guess what? That same Spirit lives in you and in me. The Spirit bids us out of a foreign country and invites us as heirs to a heavenly kingdom. So I ask you, how is the Spirit of God prompting you to go deeper with him today? Today I want to challenge you to ask God to prompt you to go deeper in your relationship with him. As I was preparing the sermon, I asked God, where are you prompting me to go in our relationship together? And immediately these walls come up around me that are masked as fears and doubts. Does anyone know what those are? Yeah, I'm afraid of asking God that question because I know it's going to require me to go outside of my comfort zone. It means that it will require me to take risks that I'm too afraid of making. At the same time, I feel the Spirit prompting, saying, Ashok, there's so much love and wonder of God you have yet to tap into. And the same is true for you. So I challenge you, husbands, wives, brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, go to your secret place today and ask God to prompt you how you can go deeper with him today. I encourage every one of us to do that. The Magi embarked on a worship-led journey because they were prompted to go, but they were also prompted to wake others up. The Magi were prompted to wake others up. Matthew chapter 2, verses 3 to 8. It says this: When King Herod heard this, he was what? Disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. In Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." You got to love the irony in this story. Imagine this. Here comes these foreign scholars rolling up into Jerusalem, fresh off the boat. Fresh off the camel's backs. They're asking people all over town where to find the King of Kings. Hey, do you know where the Messiah is? You know, the one that was prophesied by Balaam? Do you know where we can find the King of the Jews? And here's the thing. Nobody had a clue. No one had an idea. So what ends up happening? A great disturbance in Jerusalem. Ellen White writes in Desire of Ages, page 60, "The Magi were confidently expecting the Messiah's birth to be the joyful burden of every tongue. But their inquiries are in vain. Entering the holy city, they repair to the temple. To their amazement, they find none who seem to have a knowledge of the newborn king. Their questions call forth no expressions of joy, but rather of surprise and fear." She goes on to say later on page 62, "The priests and elders of Jerusalem were not as ignorant concerning the birth of Christ as they pretended. The report of the angel's visit to the shepherds had been brought to Jerusalem, but the rabbis had treated it as unworthy of their notice. They themselves might have found Jesus and might have been ready to lead the Magi to his birthplace. But instead of this, the wise men came to call their attention to the birth of the Messiah." They called their attention to the birth of the Messiah. Here's the irony. The priests and the elders were so caught up in their self-worship that they missed the greatest celebration of all. King Herod was caught defending his throne instead of welcoming the true King of Kings. These foreign, unholy men from the east exposed all this because they wanted to go and worship. And they prompted everyone to wake up. I want to ask you a question. Like the Magi, are you prompted to wake up those around you today? Who in your life needs the love of God in their life right now? Think of that person in your mind. A few weeks ago, one of our young adult leaders named Hui Pham showed me how this looks like for him. With the people that he interacts with from all sorts of walks of life, he asks them one simple question. Here's the question. Are you happy? Are you happy? He says most of the time they say no. And after building up trust and relationship with them, they show what he calls their pain points. And from there, Hui says, "I have happiness in me. And I can show you how you can attain it. That happiness is only found in Jesus." Amen. He's a bold man that knows the truth, and I believe he has that happiness in Jesus. But that's just one example of being prompted to wake someone up. What does it look like for you? Any nurses in the house? You have so many people that you work with, people who are sick, who are living in darkness. How can you give them that joy of Jesus, the happiness of Jesus? How can you wake them up out of their darkness? Like the star that's shone over a sleeping people, we are called to let the love of God bring life to those around us. Ephesians 5:13-16 says this, "Everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light." That's us. This is why it said, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." So be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. I challenge you to ask God to put a prompting on your heart to help someone wake up and receive the light of God today. The Magi came and woke up a slumbering people with the news that the Messiah had come. Continuing on in Matthew 2, 9 through 11. It says this, "After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. With worshipful hearts, the Magi came to the house bearing gifts." The Magi were prompted to return thanks. They were prompted to return thanks. Back during Thanksgiving, Pastor Greg talked about returning thanks. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to revisit that topic again, once again from the perspective of the Magi. I presume that the Magi were individuals with a high social status and wealth. And yet, in this story, they did not conduct themselves in that way. They were prompted to bow down and worship and return thanks by offering gifts of great value. The gold, frankincense, and myrrh were status symbols. In their gratefulness, their gifts symbolized something greater. The gold signified royalty, as the Messiah was sovereign over the whole universe. Frankincense represented the prayers to our intercessor. Myrrh symbolized the embalming for Jesus' death and resurrection, granting salvation to all. Whether they knew it or not, the Magi described the character and ministry of Jesus, all because they were prompted to return thanks. The campfire in Paradise, California, has been devastating. In the middle of tragedy, a beautiful example of God's love was shown by Forest Lake Christian School towards our sister school, Paradise Adventist Academy. Our girls' volleyball team had lost most of their gear as a result of the fire. They were supposed to partake in the semifinals against Forest Lake. Upon arriving to the gym after that long 1.5-hour drive, the Paradise girls found brand new jerseys and volleyball gear. On top of that, they were gifted with $300 gift cards and over $10,000 in donations by the Forest Lake community. Their generosity was unprecedented. After the game had ended, the Paradise coach said this, "We have been helped in so many ways. The girls and I have talked about how when we get that opportunity, it's going to be our turn to give back and try to pass on this generous spirit and sense of community." Powerful. The open hands and hearts of the Forest Lake community shows the gratefulness of Jesus in their own lives and inspires others to return thanks. It says in Desire of Ages, page 65, "If we have given our hearts to Jesus, we also shall bring our gifts to him. Our gold and silver, our most precious earthly possessions, our highest mental and spiritual endowments will be freely devoted to him who loved us and gave himself for us." Because of what Jesus has done for us, we are prompted to return thanks. How is God prompting you to return thanks today? I know for me this is challenging. I've gripped tightly to my finances, my resources, my time, my energy. But when I look at the Magi, I desire to have open hands like them, because they knew the value of experiencing God outweighed anything else that was a part of their life. So I ask you, does the value of God in your life outweigh everything else? If so, I prompt you to return thanks in any way that God is inspiring you today. The Magi were prompted to go on a journey of a lifetime to experience the Messiah. They were prompted to wake others up with the good news. They were prompted to return thanks by gifting symbols of Jesus' ministry. But here's the thing, there's a twist. The story of the Magi has an interesting conclusion. Matthew chapter 2, verse 12 says this, "And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, the Magi returned to their country by another route." In order to escape death, the Magi did not go back the same way they came. No, instead they were prompted to go on a different route. But they were not the only ones. Matthew later says that an angel of the Lord prompted Mary and Joseph to take Jesus to Egypt so that they too could escape death. I look at their journeys of going on different routes, and I wonder if they all tasted some sort of bittersweet emotion. What do I mean by that? The excitement of experiencing the Messiah was life-changing. But at the same time, I wonder if they all carried the grief and the burden of mourning all the baby boys Herod had put to death. In their escape of death, I bet you they longed for God's vindication and justice. In the same way, you and I are facing death every single day because of sin. But like the Magi and Mary and Joseph, we are prompted to go on a different route. Thanks be to our Messiah. And I want to close by saying we are all prompted to go on a different route. About 3 weeks ago, I stood by this beautiful mother who was laying her son's body in his final resting place. I watched as she knelt by the grave. I listened to her sing over him in her native tongue. I felt the heavy rain come down as if God's own tears were blanketing her. And I could think in that moment, there's probably no pain like what a mother feels when she has to grieve for the loss of a child. For a brief moment, in a very limited way, I believe all of us who were standing there by her felt a little bit of her pain. And it was excruciating. It was heartbreaking. And I look at her journey. She has looked death square in the face in its coldest, darkest state. Her route is long and it's going to be uncertain. Where is her hope? Where is her direction? King Solomon writes this in Ecclesiastes 3:11. For God has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart. In every heart, God has placed eternity. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I believe God has placed eternity in every heart that has ever beat on this earth, that is yearning for Jesus. And by the vastness of God's love, I hope that this mother knows. I hope that she knows that God is preparing a place for her, a final resting place where she doesn't have to deal with this grief and this sorrow, where she doesn't have to mourn and live in darkness, but she gets to sit with Jesus face to face, and he will unveil to her the full beauty of her son's journey. I hope that every single day that she faces, she will receive the joy from heaven that shines brighter than her present suffering. But I don't just wish that for her. I wish that for all of us, right here, right now. My family, we once were supposed to walk down a route that led to death, but no longer, not anymore. Jesus came down to this earth and walked the route that led to a cross. And once and for all, he said, death was done. It was finished. And when he went to that grave, he walked 3 days later, paving a different route for us. Amen. A route that leads to life and life everlasting, not exclusive to any one person, but to us all, his heirs. Amen. So Jesus says this in John 14. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. This is what uncommon love looks like. That the Son of Heaven came down, was born in an unprepared stable, yet he is now preparing a room in glory for us right now. That is our present reality. Let's live in it. Therefore, you and I are prompted to go on a different route that leads Jesus to welcoming us home. Imagine that. Imagine his outstretched arms welcoming you home. Imagine his face full of love and pride for his outstanding love for you. Imagine him giving you the warmest hug and embrace. Imagine that. I can't wait for that. If you believe in God's prompting to a new route that leads to heaven, I ask that you stand with me. And as we sing this song, I want you to think about the words. Think about your present reality, that Christ is enough for you, is leading you to heaven, and that you get to dwell on that present reality right now. Let's sing together.